This story is titled My Fiancée's Shocking Secret, a face tattoo that changed everything.
When I first met Erin, I thought she was the kind of person who had her whole life together. She carried herself with confidence and had this no-nonsense attitude that instantly made you feel like you could trust her. Over the 6 years we'd been together, that trust had only deepened. So when she told me she wasn't feeling well and needed a few days to herself, I didn't think twice about it. Erin wasn't one for dramatics or lies. At least that's what I believed back then. She had taken 3 days off work, claiming she was sick. But looking back, the signs were there. Erin had avoided video calls, refused to meet her sister Laura for their weekly lunch, and barely texted me during the day. It felt off, but I figured everyone has their moments. Maybe she really was overwhelmed. I was used to trusting her implicitly. Erin had never given me a reason to question her, and it was part of what made me love her. Her family didn't seem alarmed either. Everyone just assumed she needed rest.
By the third day, Laura, who had grown increasingly concerned, decided to stop by unannounced. I was at work when it happened, but Laura later called me in a fluster. "She's done something insane, and you need to see it to believe it," she said, her voice a mix of shock and anger. When I walked into the apartment that evening, the air felt tense. Erin was sitting on the couch, her arms crossed tightly, as though she was bracing for impact. But what struck me immediately was her face. There it was, black ink etched into her forehead, running down under her eye in a series of Japanese characters. The tattoo looked swollen and painfully fresh, the redness spreading like an aura around the symbols. "I wanted to tell you," she said, breaking the silence. Her voice carried that defensive edge I'd only heard during our rare fights. "But I knew you'd try to talk me out of it."
Talk her out of it? That was an understatement. I was floored. We'd been together 6 years, and not once had Erin ever brought up tattoos. She didn't even seem interested in them, not on herself or anyone else. And now, this? A face tattoo? It wasn't just a shock. It felt like a betrayal of everything I thought I knew about her.
"Why would you hide this from me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, though my head was spinning. "Erin, this isn't something small. This is your face." She shrugged, avoiding my gaze. "I've been planning it for months," she said. "I just didn't tell anyone because I didn't want anyone ruining it for me."
It was a response I couldn't wrap my head around. How could she plan something this drastic without a word to me? Or even Laura, who she usually confided in about everything. She went on to explain that the tattoo held deep artistic meaning for her and that she was tired of living her life based on what others thought.
But none of it made sense to me. Erin worked in a public-facing job at a financial firm, meeting clients every day. How did she think this was going to play out at work? And what about her family? Her parents were Japanese immigrants, deeply rooted in traditional values. Tattoos, especially in their culture, were often associated with crime and carried heavy stigma. "You've always been the stable one, Erin," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why now? Why this?" She didn't have a clear answer. All I got was a vague, "I needed to do this for myself." The more Erin tried to explain her decision, the more surreal the whole thing felt. She said she'd been feeling stifled lately, like everyone had expectations for who she should be and how she should act. "I just wanted to do something for me," she said, her tone a mix of defiance and self-justification. I tried to listen. Really, I did. But every word felt like another jab to the gut. For 6 years, we'd built a life based on trust and shared decisions. And now, without so much as a heads up, she'd gone and made a choice that could alter the course of her career, her relationships, and even our future together.
It wasn't just about the tattoo itself, though that was shocking enough. The design, bold and unapologetic, consisted of several Japanese kanji symbols running vertically down her forehead and curving under her right eye. Erin's parents, both first-generation Japanese immigrants, would undoubtedly have strong feelings about this. In their culture, tattoos often carried associations with criminal activity or rebellion, something Erin had grown up fully aware of. To her, these symbols might hold personal artistic meaning, but to her parents, it would be a slap in the face.
"What do they even mean?" I finally asked, gesturing toward the ink on her face. Erin hesitated. "They're about freedom and self-expression," she said vaguely, as if the exact translation didn't matter as much as the message she wanted them to convey. Laura's voice echoed in my mind, warning me that her parents were already in shock. Apparently, her mom had broken down in tears when she saw Erin's face, and her dad had stormed out of the house, muttering something in Japanese that Laura didn't fully understand but knew wasn't good. I hadn't even processed my own feelings yet, And now I had to think about how this would ripple through her family, her workplace, and everything else we'd built together. But Erin wasn't done. "You're upset because you don't understand it," she said, her voice growing sharper. "I didn't tell you because I knew you'd react like this." "How am I supposed to react, Erin?" I shot back, my frustration finally spilling over. "You work with clients face to face. You meet people every day who are supposed to trust you with their money, and now you've got a face tattoo. Did you even think about how this would affect your job, or your family, or us?" She looked away, her jaw tightening. "It's my face," she said. "My choice." Her words hung in the air, heavy with finality. I wanted to yell, to demand answers, but I could see there was no getting through to her. In Erin's mind, this was her victory, her declaration of independence from the expectations of everyone around her. But to me, it felt like she'd torn apart the foundation of our relationship in one impulsive act. Later that night, as I sat on the couch scrolling aimlessly through my phone, a text from Laura popped up. "How's she doing?" it read. I wanted to reply honestly, to tell her that Erin was acting like a stranger, that I had no idea what to do anymore. But instead, I typed, "She's fine," and left it at that. The truth was, I wasn't fine. I couldn't stop imagining the fallout. What would her boss say when she walked into work? Erin was a client-facing financial analyst. The firm she worked for had a strict dress code and prided itself on professionalism. There was no way they'd overlook a face tattoo, no matter how meaningful it was to her. And her parents, how would they ever forgive her? I'd seen firsthand how much they valued tradition and respectability. Her father had spent years working tirelessly to give Erin and Laura every opportunity, hoping they'd honor the sacrifices he'd made to move to this country. How would he reconcile this with the daughter he thought he knew? The next morning, Erin called her boss to break the news. I overheard parts of the conversation from the kitchen. She framed it as a step toward personal growth, using phrases like authenticity and artistic self-expression. I couldn't hear the response, but her face was grim when she hung up. "Well?" I asked, bracing for impact. "They're letting me take unpaid leave while they review their policy," she said, her voice tight. "It's not like I was going to stay there forever anyway." I stared at her, trying to process the fact that she'd jeopardized her entire career for this. But Erin just shrugged, as if losing her job was a minor inconvenience compared to the freedom she'd gained. Erin's decision didn't just affect her career. It sent shockwaves through her family, too. Her parents, Keiko and Hiroshi, were deeply rooted in their Japanese heritage, and for them, the concept of respectability was paramount. They had worked tirelessly after immigrating to provide a stable life for Erin and Laura, teaching them the importance of tradition and pride in their culture. In their eyes, tattoos weren't just frowned upon. They were a symbol of rebellion and disgrace, often tied to criminal activity in Japanese culture.
Laura had tried to soften the blow, but there was no easy way to explain to their parents that Erin now had ink permanently etched onto her face. When Keiko saw the tattoo for the first time, she burst into tears, her hands covering her mouth as if she could somehow undo what she'd seen. Hiroshi, normally a reserved man, couldn't even bring himself to look at Erin. Instead, he muttered something in Japanese, his voice low and laced with disappointment, before leaving the room entirely. Laura later told me she'd never seen him like that before.
When I asked Erin about it, she shrugged it off. "They'll come around," she said, as if their dismay were some minor inconvenience. "They just need time to get used to it." But it wasn't that simple. Her parents didn't just see the tattoo as a personal choice. They saw it as a rejection of everything they had worked so hard to instill in her. And truth be told, I could see their point. This wasn't like dyeing your hair a bold color or getting a hidden tattoo where only a few people would ever notice. Erin had made a statement, one that was impossible to ignore.
The tension at home grew unbearable. Keiko refused to speak to Erin directly, communicating only through Laura, and Hiroshi buried himself in work, avoiding family dinners altogether. For a while, I felt like I was caught in the middle, trying to mediate between Erin's defiant independence and her parents' crushing disappointment. But the more I tried to talk to Erin about it, the more defensive she became.
"They don't own me," she snapped one night after I suggested she apologize to her parents. "I'm not going to live my life for them, or for you for that matter." Her words stung more than I expected. For years, I'd prided myself on being the supportive partner, the one who encouraged Erin to chase her dreams and make her own choices. But this felt like something else entirely. It wasn't about self-expression. It was about shutting out the people who cared about her the most. The fights between us became more frequent. Every conversation seemed to circle back to the same argument. Erin insisting that this was her life and no one else's business, and me struggling to make her see the consequences of her actions. The worst part was, I wasn't even sure I knew who she was anymore. The Erin I fell in love with wouldn't have done something so drastic without at least talking it through with me first. One night, after another heated argument, Erin stormed out of the apartment. She didn't say where she was going, and I didn't bother asking. I sat on the couch for hours, staring at the door, half expecting her to come back and tell me she'd changed her mind about everything. But she didn't. When I finally went to bed, the apartment felt emptier than it ever had before. The next morning, I woke up to a string of messages from Laura. "She's not picking up my calls," one text read. "Dad says she's dead to him," said another. I could feel the weight of her family's heartbreak in every word. Erin had always been the golden child, the one her parents looked to with pride and hope. And now, that image was shattered. When Erin finally came home, she acted like nothing had happened. She sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone as if we hadn't just had one of the worst fights of our relationship. I didn't know whether to be angry or heartbroken. "Your dad says he's done," I told her, breaking the silence. She looked up, her expression blank. "He'll get over it." "Will he?" I asked, my voice trembling with frustration. "Erin, this isn't just about you. Do you even care how much you've hurt them?" Her eyes narrowed. "I care about being true to myself," she said. "If they can't handle that, it's their problem, not mine." That was the moment I realized how far apart we'd drifted. The Erin sitting in front of me wasn't the person I'd fallen in love with. She was someone I barely recognized, someone who valued her own independence above everything else, even if it meant burning bridges with the people who loved her most. The days that followed felt like living in a constant state of tension, as if the air itself had grown heavier. Erin's parents weren't speaking to her, and even Laura seemed to be pulling back. For someone who claimed she didn't care what others thought, Erin seemed strangely fixated on defending her decision. Every conversation turned into a debate about freedom, authenticity, and how everyone else was too narrow-minded to understand her. But the truth was, it wasn't just about the tattoo anymore. It was about the cracks that had started forming in our relationship long before the ink touched her skin. This decision had become the flashpoint for something much bigger, a fundamental difference in how we viewed life, family, and partnership. And no matter how much I tried to ignore it, the gap between us was growing too wide to bridge. Then came the night that everything unraveled. Erin and I were sitting in the living room, each of us lost in our own thoughts. She was scrolling through her phone as usual, while I was staring blankly at the TV. The silence between us felt oppressive, like a storm waiting to break. Finally, I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Do you even regret it?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. She glanced at me, her expression unreadable. "Regret what?" "This," I said, gesturing vaguely at her face. "The tattoo, the fallout, all of it." She put her phone down and leaned back against the couch. "No," she said simply. "I don't." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd been clinging to the hope that, deep down, she might feel some remorse. That maybe this was just a phase, something we could work through together. But her unwavering defiance made it clear. Erin wasn't looking back, and she wasn't planning to compromise. "You don't regret losing your job?" I pressed. "Or hurting your parents? Or what this is doing to us?" She sighed, as if my questions were exhausting her. "I didn't lose my job," she said. "I'm on leave. And as for my parents, they'll come around eventually. They always do." "And us?" I asked, my voice breaking slightly. Her eyes softened for the first time in weeks. "I love you," she said. "But I need you to love me for who I am, not for who you want me to be." It was a nice sentiment, but it felt hollow. The person sitting across from me wasn't the Erin I'd fallen in love with. That Erin had been thoughtful, considerate, and deeply connected to the people around her. This Erin seemed determined to push everyone away, all in the name of authenticity. The fight that followed was the worst one yet. Words were said that couldn't be taken back. I accused her of being selfish, reckless, and blind to the consequences of her actions. She called me controlling, unsupportive, and unwilling to accept her for who she truly was. By the end of it, we were both yelling, our voices echoing through the apartment like gunshots. And then, just like that, it was over. Erin grabbed her coat and walked out the door, slamming it behind her. I didn't follow. I just sat there, staring at the empty space where she'd been, wondering how we'd gotten to this point.
The next morning, I woke up to find her engagement ring sitting on the kitchen counter. Beside it was a small box filled with the things I'd given her over the years: notes, trinkets, little reminders of the life we'd built together. There was no note, no explanation, just silence.
I tried calling her, but my number was blocked. Laura said she hadn't heard from her either, and her parents were still refusing to talk to her. It was as if Erin had vanished, cutting ties with everyone who had once been part of her world. At first, I was angry, furious even. How could she walk away so easily? How could she throw everything away without even trying to fix it? But as the days turned into weeks, my anger gave way to something else, a deep, aching sadness. The woman I'd loved was gone, and there was nothing I could do to bring her back. In the weeks following Erin's departure, life became a blur of routines and empty spaces. I'd go to work, come home, and sit in the quiet apartment that still held faint traces of her, her favorite blanket on the couch, the mug she always used for coffee, and the faint smell of her perfume lingering in the closet. Each reminder felt like a small wound reopening, but I couldn't bring myself to pack her things away. It was as if doing so would make her absence permanent, a reality I wasn't ready to accept. I threw myself into work, hoping that staying busy would dull the pain. But no amount of distraction could stop the questions that haunted me. Had I overreacted? Could I have been more supportive? Was this my fault? Over and over, I replayed our last argument, trying to pinpoint the moment when everything had gone irreparably wrong. Laura checked in on me occasionally, though I could tell she was dealing with her own version of the fallout. Erin hadn't contacted her since leaving, and their parents were still too hurt to discuss the situation. "She's stubborn," Laura said during one of our conversations. "She'll come around eventually, she always does." But even she didn't sound convinced.
A month after Erin left, I finally heard from her. Not directly, but through a mutual friend who had seen her at a cafe on the other side of town. According to them, she looked different, happier, freer, as if a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. I didn't know whether to feel relieved or resentful. While I was here trying to piece my life back together, she seemed to have moved on without a second thought.
Still, I couldn't bring myself to hate her. Erin's decision had hurt me deeply, but I knew it hadn't been an easy one for her either. She'd made a choice to prioritize herself, to break free from the expectations of everyone around her, and while I couldn't understand it, I had to respect it. Maybe she'd find the happiness she was looking for. Maybe she already had. As for me, I started taking small steps toward rebuilding my own life. I reached out to friends I hadn't seen in years, reconnected with my family, and even started therapy to work through the tangled mess of emotions Erin had left behind. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the sadness felt overwhelming. But slowly, I began to see glimpses of a future that didn't revolve around her.
The turning point came when I decided to clear out the apartment. It was time to let go of the physical reminders of our relationship, the photos, the notes, the little trinkets that once held so much meaning. I packed everything into a box and left it with Laura, asking her to hold on to it in case Erin ever wanted it back. It was a small act of closure, but it felt significant. For the first time in months, I felt like I was reclaiming my space, my life, and my sense of self.
Looking back, I can't say I regret the years I spent with Erin. She taught me a lot about love, about trust, and about the importance of staying true to yourself, even when it's hard. But she also taught me that relationships can't survive without communication and compromise, and that sometimes loving someone means letting them go. I don't know where Erin is now or what she's doing. Part of me hopes she's found what she was looking for, while another part hopes she'll reach out one day so we can have the conversation we never finished. But until then, I'm moving forward, one step at a time, one day at a time. The world feels different now, both emptier and fuller at the same time. Emptier because she's gone, but fuller because I've learned that I can stand on my own. And for the first time in a long time, that feels like enough.